my drunken shenanigans, I realized I forgot a dead shirt in the last video, so I owed you that one. Press F to pay respects. The Enterprise crew are packing up from a scientific expedition on Alpha 177, where they've picked up a dog in a unicorn costume. They have to leave the planet very quickly because the temperature drops to under negative 100 degrees at night. A crew member gets covered in some magnetic dust after a small rock slide and is beamed aboard to have his wounded hand tended to. Afterward, Kirk is beamed up, leaving Sulu and 2 others below to finish packing. After stepping off the transporter pad, Kirk shows signs of dizziness. He and Scotty leave, and the camera swings back to reveal another Kirk materializing on the pad. Judging by that foreboding sforzando of music, he must be evil. Meanwhile, Kirk number 1 goes to his quarters where Yeoman Rand is waiting. Rand seems to want to chat with him, but Kirk is unusually withdrawn and asks her to leave. He lies down for a nap while Kirk number 2 arrives in sickbay, acting violent and erratic and demanding Bones give him alcohol. Yes. Bones seems to think that giving an already agitated person alcohol is fine and lets him have it. Kirk number 2 leaves and stumbles upon Yeoman Rand's room. He grins lecherously and lets himself in. Spock goes to visit Kirk number 1 and,
Is there something I can do for you, Captain? Like what?
I think Spock just got pregnant. After Spock takes a cold shower, he and Kirk number 1 arrive in the transporter room where Scotty reveals that the unicorn dog was copied when they beamed him aboard. One is gentle and tame, while the other is feral and savage. Since the transporter's on the fritz, it means Sulu and the rest of the landing party are stuck on the slowly freezing planet. As Spock and Kirk number 1 learn this news, Rand returns to her quarters. Kirk number 2 takes her by surprise and, well, this is why there is a content warning at the beginning of the video. If you find discussing this topic disturbing, close the video now. I think what's most disturbing about this scene is the realism. Kirk number 2 plays on Rand's latent attraction to Kirk and uses it as leverage to get what he wants. He tries to smooth talk her before going in for the attack. It's so much more insidious than just having bad Kirk jump out at her from the shadows. He watches her from his hiding spot for several minutes before revealing himself, as if calculating his next move, like a predator. And the ensuing struggle is a long handheld take done mostly in close-up with the actual actors themselves and not stunt doubles. It gives the viewer the feeling that they're actually there in the room and are powerless to stop this horrible thing from happening. Rand manages to fight Kirk number 2 off and leaves a scratch on his face. Another crew member sees them and Kirk number 2 flees. Spock questions Kirk number 1, who claims he hasn't left his quarters. He and Spock leave to investigate, and Kirk number 2 darts into Kirk's quarters to hide. You think he'd avoid his own cabin since that'd be the first place they'd look for him, right? Man, I know the scenes with bad Kirk often get taken out of context to display how hammy the acting in Star Trek is. I'm guilty of that myself. But Shatner is really committed to the physicality of bad Kirk. I think he deserves kudos. Okay, now this is where I take issue with the episode. Rand is forced to give her account of bad Kirk's assault on her in front of the man who she thinks just tried to rape her. This is not how you treat victims of sexual assault. When rape victims come forward, they have to be allowed a space to speak in where they don't have to worry about being intimidated or undermined by their assailants. We know Kirk is innocent, but if he wasn't, he could easily use his influence on her, both professional and personal, to manipulate or gaslight her. If it weren't for the witness, Rand wouldn't have a leg to stand on against Kirk, since Kirk number 1 doesn't have the scratch on his face. I get that rape culture wasn't as well-defined in the 60s as it is today, but it's something important to bring up, especially in today's world. Boy, this is a loaded video. Quick, make a joke to keep it light. Hey, look, Kirk wears makeup! Actually, this is a really good time to bring up why all the boys in Star Trek seem to wear fabulous eyeshadow, and not just because it makes them look pretty. The end of the 1960s marked the transitional period in television from black and white to color. In the original Doctor Who series, the show ends its black and white era with the last serial of the second Doctor's run in 1969, The War Games, and goes to full Technicolor with the third Doctor's first story, Spearhead from Space, in 1970. The Starfleet tricolor uniforms are a reflection of this change. Since we have color on TV now, why not take advantage of it? But as lighting and color keying and cinematography changed, makeup departments had to change their techniques too. Before color TV, dark eyeshadow was applied to actors to make their eyes appear more dramatic. Makeup artists hadn't thought to change their techniques for color film yet, so now when we watch these digitally remastered episodes of Star Trek, male and female actors alike seem to have a penchant for striking eyeshadow. And you know what? They all look fucking great. Spock concludes that Jim must have been copied like the unicorn dog, and now there's an evil version of him running around the ship. Meanwhile, Sulu and the landing party are slowly freezing to death. The clock is ticking and Kirk number 1 is feeling the pressure. He decides to put out a ship-wide alert about his evil double. Spock reminds the clearly anxious Kirk that as the captain, he can't show weakness in front of the crew. Imagine what a toll that must take on an individual to not be allowed to show vulnerability. Kirk number 1 puts out the APB on himself, and Kirk number 2 overhears from his cabin, declaring that he is the real Captain Kirk. To keep from distinguishing himself, he covers Rand's scratch with concealer. I know I mentioned it before, but I find it interesting that Kirk owns makeup in the first place. Perhaps in the 23rd century, traditional gender roles, as we know them, don't apply. Or maybe Kirk just wants to feel pretty.
Tell me I'm pretty, Mother.
Kirk number 2 tricks a crewman into giving him his weapon, then knocks him out and takes off. Sulu reports that it's already 20 below on the planet, yet is only mildly shivering in his light sweater. I think the director has severely underestimated how cold negative 20 degrees is. Kirk number 1 and Spock surmise that Kirk number 2 will hide in engineering and corner him. They take him to sickbay and tie him down to a biobed. Kirk number 1's showing more signs of indecisiveness and lack of will, and what little sanity Kirk number 2 seems to have is unraveling. The two halves are dying without each other.
I have to take him back. Inside myself.
Oh my.
Scotty runs a test on the Unidog to see if the transporter will combine Kirk's two halves, but it fails. Spock believes the corn dog was killed by shock from being slapped back together, while Bones just isn't sure. Kirk number 1, the indecisive one, is forced to make a decision about whether or not to submit himself to trying the transporter or not. Kirk number 2 tricks his weaker self and makes a break for it, arriving on the bridge and assuming command. Bones and everyone is momentarily confused which one is the good Kirk, but Spock knows right away. Kirk number 1 lulls Kirk number 2 into a calm and convinces him to get on the transporter with him so they can be one person again. Spock successfully recombines the two Kirks and the landing crew is saved. The duality of man. I'm gonna be upfront here. The Enemy Within is my favorite TOS episode. I find it so fascinating in what it has to say about the positives and negatives of human nature. The dichotomy between the two Kirks is, in my humble opinion, more nuanced than good and bad. In fact, it's Freudian. Sigmund Freud postulated that the human psyche was made up of three components: the id, the ego, and the superego. The superego is the part of human nature that aspires to be better, the intellect and moral compass. The id is animal impulse, lust, anger, passion, and the ego sits in the middle, the compromising force between the two that takes reality into account. Kirk number 1 is Kirk's superego, his intelligence, morals, and compassion. In effect, his better self. Kirk number 2 is the id, the unbridled desires of the flesh. When Kirk was split, the ego was lost, and thus a vital part of himself was missing. Without all three united, the person we know as Kirk began to die. Superego Kirk is calm and wise, but unable to make decisions or fulfill his role as a leader. He needs his dark half to help guide him. Psychologist Carl Jung believed that in every one of us, there is a shadow, an amalgamation of the nasty things we don't like about ourselves. We tend to distance ourselves from these qualities because we don't want to think about them being a part of us. But Jung believed that our shadow selves weren't meant to be ignored or suppressed, but to be confronted. We have to be aware of our shadow to be able to control it. And indeed, some parts of our shadows can be repurposed into positive tools, like strength of will, the ability to command others. The shadow is an undeniable part of who we are. We all have it within ourselves to do evil things like rape, to be drunkards, to be violent. That doesn't mean that's really who we are. We are not our ids. Kirk is strong enough to live primarily by his superego, always trying to do the right thing. The inverse, a Kirk ruled by his dark impulses, would be a tyrannical nightmare. At the end of the day, James Kirk is not a paragon of virtue, nor is he a wild, lustful madman. He's human. He's us.
You want to know how I got these scars?